Welcome back to the channel, folks, where today we hope to deal with the newly introduced National Security Act of 2023 and its relevance to photographers and drone flyers. Since then, the National Security Act of 2023 has come along in all its glory, granting additional powers to police officers, and it is this that we will have a look at in due course. Just a few points before we get into the main step proper. 1. You may recall that we covered this topic on designated sites and auditing in the public spaces presentation, the link of which is in the description. Point 2. The law on occasions can be like watching paper dry, quite literally. So I have tried to embellish the video by including a few visual slides of interest, whilst at the same time remaining on point in respect of the law. Point 3. In order to reflect and emphasise those points, I have called upon two professional audits. The principal one being the audit by TLA on the MI6 building and another by DJ Audits. Finally, point 4, and probably most important, this is not a critique of the National Security Act 2023, which is a much needed modernisation of the existing security rights within the country to accommodate today's modern threats. Threats to our national security are many and diverse and are in no one's interest. These include things like sabotage, espionage, cybersecurity, computer hacking, and many more threats which often go unseen of. I take the liberty of including this tranquil scene of a pleasure gardens with the River Thames visible in the top left hand corner at Vauxhall, which is now the site of the MI6 building, and how quickly things can change in the world that we live. I stress that the following slide is a dramatisation from the James Bond movie Skyfall, available on YouTube in the links beneath the video description. Just a few slides from the relevant government advisory agency, current as of December 2024, in relation to prohibited places. The first part of the guidance informative is somewhat contradictory, it being the fundamental function of the sign to inform the public that it is a prohibitive place. Failure to delineate the designated site by the presence of any map or boundary indicator further confounds the confusion to the public. In the matter of signage in respect of matters of trespass must always be overt and identify the principal act and sections within the act which is relied upon. In the case of DJ's audit, the black and white site is not particularly overt, and in the case of TLA's audit, it's unclear as to whether the sign means within the site or at what point in the public it ceases to be relevant. Government guidelines also indicate that there is no requirement to advertise a prohibitive place, which brings in the potential to conflict with the laws of trespass. Okay folks, so let's dig a little deeper into the NSA of 2023 and look at what is relevant to the man on the street. The 2023 Act is a large act encompassing and embellishing a number of circumstances ranging from sabotage to foreign intervention by state actors. It consists of 6 parts, 102 sections and 18 schedules. However, let's just look at what is relevant to that experienced by the additional police powers in relation to photographers and drone flyers, which is found in part 1. So what we're going to do next is to look at each section, commencing with section 4, which is relevant to drone flyers, in the context of the National Security Act's explanatory notes. So the first thing to note is the offence is created within Part 4, 1A, 1 and 2. And the key terms are accesses, enters, inspects, passes over or under, or approaches or is in the vicinity of a prohibitive place. The latter, which is approaches or in the vicinity of a prohibitive place, is not entirely clear. So does that mean approaches or is in the vicinity after you cross a fence or delineated boundary, or as you move up to the delineated boundary where technically you would be in a public area? So the first thing to say here is that is relatively unclear. My view or opinion, which for avoidance of doubt is merely that, not legal advice, is that the point of access begins at the point of notification, with one notable exception. That exception is expressed to drone flyers within the meaning of 4.1a.2, which causes a drone or device to access, enter, inspect, pass over, etc., etc. And the Act is very clear about that. It indicates the passage over by a drone whilst you're flying it remote, i.e. outside the site. But not only that, careful reading of the explanatory notes also indicates it engages third-party territorial airspace rights. And what that basically means is if a drone was being flown remotely from outside the United Kingdom. So it is clear that there is a terrorist threat from drones being flown from without the United Kingdom. The explanatory notes in the Act are in fact relatively clear. They indicate three options for entry and access. To summarise, individual access is when a person would physically cross a delineated boundary. Electronic access is expressed to, for example, hacking into a CCTV network and obtaining, inspecting or looking at images. And thirdly, remote access, which is that which affects the drone pilot. And that remote access can either be external to the property or to the prohibited place, or in another country where third-party territorial airspace rights would be engaged should a drone be flown external to the UK. Should such places be specifically designated as prohibitive places by the Secretary of State, then one would expect that the Civil Aviation Authority would be informed of a no-fly zone. So this brings me very neatly back to the observations on DJ Audits, mainstay video on the National Security Act, and some observations and thoughts on it. The first thing that occurs to me is, number one, when you consult the drone assist map, there is in fact no flight restriction zone, as you can see from the following maps. Further to that, the signage which is located on site is not given in the template form, which normally would be a red sign. It's given in a rather nondescript black and white sign, which is not exactly overt. So it leads me to wonder whether or not this site has actually been prescribed by the Secretary of State to be a prohibited site or not. And that would bring into scope the validity and legality of the signage, and whether or not the signage was being used as a ruse to scare photographers off. 107 of the explanatory notes is clear that such a facility could fall within the meaning of a prohibitive building, that is to say, used for the development, invention, production, operation, storage or disposal of weapons. However, it would regardless still need the approval of the Secretary of State in regard to being a designated prohibitive place. In the case of TLA's video of the MI6 building in London, it was alleged by a CCTV operator that he put his camera through the railings, yet there is no evidence of that whatsoever. In regard to the response of the police, A police officer could have no reasonable or objective suspicion without in fact first viewing that video footage. It would be remiss not to point out under section 4.5 of this Act that the offence is indictable, carrying a prison sentence of up to 14 years and or a fine. Therefore, technically, auditors, photographers and tourists should be aware that inadvertently placing the camera through the bars could constitute the offence of trespass. Likewise, moving a piece of art to obtain a better view could even technically be viewed as sabotage. Another interesting feature of the TLA video at MI6 in London is that of accidental inclusion while staff access and egress the prohibited building directly into a public space where they may be caught by accidental inclusion, and the meaning of inspecting images within the meaning of the Act. One might have thought that a high-risk prohibited building would have their own means of access and egress to prevent such things happening, as is the case at MI6. We turn now to Part 4.5 and the vexed question of authorisation. It seems to me within the meaning of the term unauthorised and expressly within 5.2 of the Act that the term unauthorised is directed at people who do not have permission to be on site, or if applied to a drone flyer, those who are not authorised through the CAA by way of a flyer ID and or a licence. It seems to me that there is limited informative on those prohibitive sites and the airspace above it, particularly those sites in the UK that fall out with the more obvious Crown land and military bases. It seems to me that if the owner or operator of such prohibitive sites or buildings has not engaged with the CAA to engage a no-fly zone or a restricted fly zone, then that the authorisation to fly over the place exists within the meaning of the CAA regulations. The exception to this, of course, would be to fly sufficiently low such as to constitute trespass under the Civil Aviation Act, or, in the alternative, to fly sufficiently low to be invasive on privacy. Section 95 to 100 of the explanatory notes are not overly helpful in this area. Assuming lawful authority is maintained by the Air Acts and the CAA authority, then the question resolves to when does the public airspace begin. It also reverts to the conditional interpretation of whether a person reasonably ought to know that the conduct of the flight would be prejudicial to that of the UK. So what of the simple question, can I fly my drone over a prohibitive place and take a photograph? What the Act appears to say is no, you cannot enter the site and you cannot trespass on it. The Act also says you cannot fly without authorisation. However, if there is no restriction placed on the overflight, then that authority exists with the CAA. So it seems to be geared towards those people using drones unlawfully. There appears to me to be no clear answer within the ambit of this Act. What to do? Well, if you were to conduct a flight, you would do so at your own responsibility. However, if you so do, it would most likely be most prudent to contact the CAA to get a flight approval over the area. That way you would cover yourself by having an authorisation. I'd also just qualify that these type of industrial site flights are going to be in a minority, and where circumstances such as Crown land or Crown vessels or any other major Crown infrastructure applies, it goes without saying that one should not conduct a flight. Prohibited places, unlike the many MOD sites such as MOD, Crown land or vessels, are much more obvious as flight restriction zones on apps like Drone Assist. So we're now going to have a quick look at Section 6 of the National Security Act, which is the enhanced powers given to police over that of PACE. Section 1A and 1B are clear. They are designed to move someone on who has clearly entered the site physically, or in the alternative, entered it at low level flying a drone to which he has no authority to fly. The problem that we have with Section 1C is the term area adjacent. As discussed previously, the problem that we have is determining whether the area adjacent to or in the vicinity of means after or before the point of notification. If you are lawfully in the public domain, flying a drone with the appropriate authority from the Civil Aviation Authority, and doing so for the purposes of filming other than that which the conduct indicates, and you satisfy the officer that that is the case, i.e. a social media channel, then it would become very difficult for the officer to justify his suspicion. Whilst there are circumstances where those enhanced power to a constable will allow for him to ask someone to cease and move on, there is a line that should not be crossed, as in Section 6.3. A constable may not exercise a power under the subsection 1 and 2 unless the constable reasonably believes that exercising the power is necessary to protect the safety or interests of the United Kingdom. And in order to do that, he would have to justify it, and you would be quite within your right under PACE to ask him for his grounds of suspicion, grounds of arrest, or whatever the case may be. Take note, however, that Section 6.4 creates an offence to disobey the officer's order or instruction, this being a secondary offence consequential to the main offence of Section 4.1a and 4.1b, which carries the indictable implication. Part 7 of the Act gives the meaning of prohibited places, and that can include Crown land used for UK defence, mines or minerals, again for UK defence purposes. It can also include vehicles, such as planes or tanks, any land or building in the UK owned or controlled by the Security Intelligence Services or GCHQ, as well as other Crown lands such as owned by His Majesty the King. We turn our attention now to the man on the Clapham omnibus, in other words, the reasonable man. Anything given to be prejudicial to the security of the United Kingdom is that which a reasonable person ought to know. Auditors should be acutely aware of what their footage contains, even at high altitude. Such footage can depict potential risks to national security, such as entry and exits, has chem signage as to the type of manufacturing activity, exhaust inlets and outlets, patterns and routine in terms of people's behaviour and shifts, the numbers of employees and the extent of manufacturing, the types of delivery inwards, and the overall security arrangement and CCTV location. So, although such footage may seem innocuous, auditors should give due regard to the spirit of the Act. Okay guys, that's it from me. I hope you've enjoyed this little insight into the National Security Act 2023, and you'll join me on the next video. Please like and subscribe and help this channel grow so it can bring more resources to people like yourself. Please note, nothing in this video constitutes legal advice. It is merely a discussion around opinion which will promote a healthy debate on the topic at hand. Please note that the law can change or become amended over time, and all opinions are correct at the time of publishing.